In the spring of 1983, a sealed naval archive was quietly unclassified for routine digitization at the National Archives in Washington. Inside, beneath mislabeled cargo manifests and faded convoy logs, a series of documents surfaced bearing the red stamp Harpstring. The pages were brittle, typewritten, and partially burned along the edges. Among them, radio intercepts from March 1945, a weather log referencing magnetic anomalies, and a single photograph of an empty ocean horizon marked with grease pencil coordinates 54°9, 31°W. No convoy was ever recorded at that position. Within days, the file was resealed under a new classification code. Yet a single archivist made a copy. What she uncovered suggested a naval disappearance so complete that both Allied and Axis intelligence agreed. Something in those waters was never meant to be found again. Chapter 1. Operation Harpstring, the Vanished Convoy of 1945. The final weeks of World War II were chaos at sea. Allied command was desperate to secure the remains of Germany's scientific infrastructure before the Soviets did. Entire convoys crossed the Atlantic carrying everything from jet engine components to captured V-2 specialists. But among the many transport operations shuttling between Europe and North America, one convoy was never logged in official records. It was referred to only as Operation Harpstring. On April 12, 1945, 3 weeks before Germany's surrender, the US Navy transport vessel USS Trenton, AK-214, departed the port of Cherbourg under heavy escort. Its stated mission, according to fragmentary copies of Navy command orders found in 1983, was the secure relocation of technical material, high-value personnel, and research assets to Provisional Base 9, Newfoundland. The escort group included the destroyers USS Falcon, USS Cresthaven, and 2 British corvettes on loan under joint operational status. The operation's logistical trail ends abruptly at 060 hours on April 14th. After that, nothing. Harpstring's cargo manifest, partially reconstructed from handwritten notes found in the personal diary of Lieutenant Commander Henry A. Voigt, listed among the items: Experimental Radar Interference Array, designation XG-12, sealed containers, unknown contents, from Peenemünde, 2 civilian specialists, German nationals, non-combatant status. No photographs of these containers have ever surfaced. But what makes this record extraordinary is Voigt's final log entry, written in pencil across 2 torn pages. Weather clear, sea calm, instruments failing intermittently, possible interference from cargo systems, Falcon reporting compass oscillation beyond tolerance. That same evening, Allied radio stations across the North Atlantic picked up what British decrypt teams later called anomalous transmissions. According to a surviving transcript recovered from Bletchley Park's archives, the signal originated at approximately the Trenton's last known position. The Morse bursts repeated the same phrase 5 times before cutting out. Signal lost. Object above. The signal ceased at 21:47 hours. No further transmissions were ever received from any ship in the convoy. By morning, a Royal Air Force reconnaissance flight was dispatched from Keflavik, Iceland, to sweep the coordinates. The report, declassified in 1978, noted light surface debris and 1 overturned lifeboat exhibiting unknown chemical scoring. The aircraft's navigator, Flight Officer Douglas Maynard, later described seeing a large, circular distortion on the sea surface, as if the water itself had been compressed inward. He was ordered not to file a personal statement. Officially, the disappearance was attributed to a catastrophic weather event, though no such storm was recorded by meteorological stations in the North Atlantic corridor that night. When the Navy conducted its own inquiry in May 1945, the final report, classified as Restricted Level 4, concluded that the convoy likely suffered structural failure resulting from magnetic field interference associated with experimental cargo, but the supporting evidence, including the logs and radar data, was sealed immediately under the Office of Naval Intelligence Code P2183 and never reappeared in any subsequent naval index. The Germans, however, had their own record of the event. Captured Kriegsmarine archives uncovered in 1956 referenced an Allied convoy moving through Sector Blaupunkt with an unregistered electromagnetic emission source. A U-boat under the command of Oberleutnant Karl Erich Brandt reported visual contact with multiple ships shimmering and then dissolving at approximately 2200 hours, April 14th. Brandt's war diary entry reads, "The silhouettes flickered, became translucent, then vanished. Instruments dead. I ordered dive. The sea was wrong, humming." His crew's later interrogation in British custody was marked by erratic testimony, consistent among all 12 survivors. Each described the same high-pitched tone before blacking out. The U-boat was recovered months later, adrift and unmanned, with its internal chronometers all frozen at the same timestamp, 2147. For decades, Operation Harpstring remained a myth whispered among naval historians. But in 1983, when the mislabeled file resurfaced, one detail reignited the mystery: a carbon copy of a memo dated August 1946 from the US Office of Scientific Intelligence, OSI, to the Central Intelligence Group, the predecessor of the CIA. The memo's subject line read, "Recovered object, Atlantic Theatre, possible harpstring connection." The body of the text was heavily redacted, but one line remained intact. "Recommend continuation of sonar suppression in target zone until retrieval complete." No retrieval mission was ever recorded. In 1991, a sonar survey team working on a transatlantic cable line inadvertently passed through the same coordinates. Their instruments malfunctioned repeatedly, producing distorted echoes that formed no coherent image. The project lead, Dr. Elaine Kessler, later reported that the sonar pulses returned a negative resonance, as if the seafloor were reflecting less than 0. Kessler's team was ordered to abandon the line and reroute the cable 40 nautical miles north. No explanation was provided. By 2005, independent researchers compiling declassified naval data noticed a consistent anomaly. In the official convoy registry for April 1945, the sequential convoy identifiers jumped from HX-347 to HX-349. HX-348 does not exist in any record. When questioned, the Naval Historical Center cited recording errors due to wartime documentation, inconsistencies. Yet several logistics officers interviewed in later years recalled that HX-348 had indeed been scheduled for departure from Cherbourg under a restricted code. The name attached to that convoy, Harpstring, the USS Trenton's construction records show she was laid down in Portland, Oregon in 1944 and never commissioned under standard fleet service. Her existence appears only in a single dry dock log entry, AK-214, fitted with modified electromagnetic shielding and advanced signal apparatus. Origin unknown. No photographic record of the ship has ever been verified. Attempts by maritime historians to trace her keel number through shipyard documentation have met with missing microfilm reels and altered manifests. Every official inquiry ends at the same point: blank microfiche, blacked out pages, and missing inventory tags. What remains of the story now rests on the edges of overlapping secrecy. The recovered lifeboat, documented by Icelandic coastal authorities in April 1945, was transferred to the custody of the US Navy. Its wooden hull bore circular burn marks that chemical analysis later identified as compound residues consistent with ionized salt deposits. One investigator at the time described the pattern as almost like something magnetic had drilled through the grain. The lifeboat disappeared during transfer to a military facility in Portsmouth. No accession record survives. A single name recurs throughout every remaining document: Dr. Lucas Heine, one of the German specialists reportedly aboard the USS Trenton. Before his capture, Heine had worked at Peenemunde's signal division, researching field distortion systems for radar evasion. His OSS interrogation transcript contains several redacted pages, but the surviving lines are chillingly plain. They wanted invisibility. They achieved absence. Heine died in 1948 under unclear circumstances at an army hospital in Maryland. His medical report lists acute neurological disorientation and radiation dermatosis. When his effects were catalogued, a small notebook was found containing coordinates written in blue ink. They matched the last known position of Operation Harpstring. No memorial exists for the lost men of that convoy. No shipwreck has ever been discovered. In maritime records, HX-348 is still listed as omitted. But in private circles among naval intelligence veterans, the term harpstring has taken on an unofficial meaning. An operation erased so thoroughly that even the ocean refuses to remember. In 2019, an anonymous source within the National Archives claimed a new container had been flagged for reclassification. Its label, faded but still legible, read North Atlantic, Project Harpstring Return Material. The seal date was 1957. Chapter 2. The Minsk Directive, Stalin's Secret Ghost Army. Buried beneath decades of Soviet secrecy, the Minsk Directive remains one of the least understood and most heavily redacted operations of the Eastern Front. The fragments that do exist, smuggled out of the Russian State Military Archive in 1998 by an unnamed researcher, describe a military formation that, according to every official record, never existed. They called it the 88th Independent Shock Regiment, and its orders were unlike any issued during the Second World War. The earliest known mention of the regiment appears in a decrypted German intelligence memorandum dated April 22, 1944. Compiled by the Abwehr's Eastern Section, it warns of a newly formed Soviet detachment, unregistered by standard command structure, operating independently of front command authority. German analysts had no insignia, no commanding officer name, only intercepted radio chatter repeating the phrase Operatia Vesna, Operation Spring. The intercepts ceased within a month, coinciding with the Soviet offensive preparations for Operation Bagration. Soviet records tell a different story. A surviving NKVD directive, numbered 043B and marked Strictly Confidential, was issued on May 9, 1944, from the 3rd Belarusian Front's political department. It ordered the formation of a special, experimental unit composed of volunteers and disciplinary battalion survivors, men deemed expendable but loyal. Their mission: infiltrate German rear echelons disguised as retreating Wehrmacht troops, sabotage supply lines, and create confusion before the main Soviet assault. The order bore Joseph Stalin's signature initials, though the ink appears to have been added later by another hand. The regiment's training took place in absolute secrecy at a remote site near Vyazma. Witnesses described an abandoned monastery, repurposed as barracks. Surviving photographs from the 1940s show rows of soldiers in mixed uniforms, some Soviet, some German, standing before a whitewashed chapel bearing a newly mounted loudspeaker. The purpose of this hybrid insignia was psychological warfare. According to testimonies from post-war interrogations of NKVD officers, the men underwent intensive language drills, mimicry exercises, and something more sinister: conditioning, experiments intended to alter their sense of national identity. A 1952 KGB memorandum, later declassified under limited circulation, mentions the involvement of the Institute of Neuropsychological Research in Moscow, where scientists under Dr. Lev Raskolov were developing methods of induced dual loyalty. It seems these men were subjected to hypnosis, deprivation, and auditory repetition until their own sense of origin blurred. They were trained to believe and disbelieve simultaneously, wrote one of Raskolov's assistants decades later. When deployed, they were neither Soviet nor German. They were function itself. The 88th Regiment vanished into the Belarusian forest in early June 1944. Their known route followed the old Minsk-Borisov road, moving parallel to German retreating divisions. No official battle record lists their engagement, but intercepted Wehrmacht communications recorded multiple incidents of friendly units turning weapons on their own. German radio operators described confusion and panic, entire outposts collapsing without enemy artillery. One chilling report from Army Group Center reads, "They came at dawn wearing our coats, carrying our passwords. They smiled when shot." By mid-July, as the Red Army liberated Minsk, Soviet command should have recalled the regiment, but no such order exists. Instead, the last transmission attributed to the 88th was logged by the 1st Baltic Front Signal Corps at 2300 hours, June 30th, 1944. The Morse message read, "Minsk secured. Orders unclear." After that, silence. All attempts to locate the unit failed. Their official strength, 642 men and 12 officers, was struck from the roster. Subsequent war summaries omitted the number entirely. For decades, Soviet authorities denied the regiment's existence. The few officers who might have known of the directive died or disappeared during post-war purges. Then, in 1998, an unmarked folder was found during the cataloguing of the former NKVD headquarters in Minsk. Inside were faded photographs, fragments of personnel files, and several handwritten reports labeled Vesna Project. Among the documents was an interrogation transcript of a captured German colonel dated July 1944. He described being questioned by men in Soviet uniforms who spoke perfect German, but called themselves by Russian names. They said they were from no country, the colonel testified. Their eyes were wrong, like they were remembering someone else's life. Another discovery deepened the mystery. In 2003, a Belarusian construction crew unearthed a mass grave near the village of Krupki, roughly 50 kilometers east of Minsk. Forensic analysis revealed over 70 skeletons, most wearing mismatched uniform fragments. Soviet tunics with Wehrmacht belt buckles, German boots with Red Army laces. Several skulls bore execution-style gunshot wounds to the back. DNA testing, conducted quietly by the Belarusian Academy of Sciences, indicated that at least half the remains were of Slavic origin. The rest were unidentifiable, their mitochondrial DNA showing markers inconsistent with any known regional population samples. When questioned by journalists, a retired GRU colonel named Yevgeny Sokolov admitted that the 88th had been a test of loyalty, of control, of fear. He claimed the regiment was never meant to return. They were ghosts before they died, he said. The directive ordered them to disappear. They obeyed. Supporting this, a 1947 memo from the Ministry of State Security references residual operatives Vesna, suggesting that scattered survivors may have continued acting autonomously after Minsk's liberation. Several unexplained incidents, attacks on Soviet checkpoints, disappearances of officers suspected of collaboration, are now believed to have been their work. One such report, dated September 1945, describes a group of uniformed men ambushing a Soviet supply convoy near Smolensk. When the bodies were examined, each carried a laminated slip reading, "No flag, no return." The final layer of evidence emerged after the Soviet collapse. In 1991, the opening of certain KGB archives revealed a small cache of files marked Minsk Directive, classified indefinitely. Most were missing pages, but one contained a handwritten note attributed to Lavrenti Beria himself. Directive succeeded beyond measure. Recommend destruction of all remaining subjects. The term subjects is striking. It implies the men were never regarded as soldiers at all, but as instruments of experiment. Modern historians attempting to reconstruct the regiment's path have mapped a series of radio anomalies between Borisov, Minsk, and Molodechno, precisely where German resistance collapsed with inexplicable speed. The timing aligns perfectly with the supposed actions of the 88th Regiment, yet no physical evidence of their headquarters, camps, or command structure has ever been found. It is as if they marched into the city and dissolved into history. Today, the term Minsk Directive appears only in obscure intelligence glossaries, usually under psychological warfare prototypes. Russia's Ministry of Defense maintains that all files concerning the 88th Regiment were destroyed in a fire at the Podolsk archive in 1972. No independent verification of that fire exists. Still, witnesses claim that certain sealed vaults in the basement remain off-limits, patrolled and unmarked long after declassification of most wartime records. There remains a final piece, a single reel of film labeled Vesna Training. Discovered in a private collection in 2011, it shows black and white footage of men lined up in identical uniforms stripped of insignia. An instructor off-camera repeats phrases in both Russian and German. "You are no one. No, you are everyone." The men echo him in perfect unison. At the end of the reel, one soldier breaks formation, smiling faintly before the film cuts to static. His face is unrecognizable, blurred, as if the emulsion itself resisted capture. To this day, no historian can state with certainty what happened to the 88th Independent Shock Regiment. The grave at Krupki is unmarked, the surviving film locked in an archive in Minsk, and the phrase, Minsk secured, orders unclear, remains one of the last unsolved transmissions of the war. Perhaps they were victims of their own deception, or perhaps, somewhere deep in the forest, the experiment never truly ended. Chapter 3. The Black Vault of Peenemünde. When Allied troops entered Peenemünde in May 1945, they expected the ruins of the V-2 rocket program, destroyed workshops, scattered blueprints, and the remnants of a shattered Reich experiment. What they found instead was something far stranger, buried deep beneath the test grounds. A network of sealed tunnels, accessible only through a steel hatch welded shut and marked Sperrgebiet 4. Those tunnels would become the center of one of the most persistent mysteries of the war, the Black Vault. The first Allied officer to record its existence was Lieutenant Colonel James R. Whittaker, U.S. Army Ordnance Corps, attached to the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS. In his field notebook, dated May 17, 1945, he wrote, "Eastern Sector, subterranean structure discovered under launch stands 7th. Entrance shows signs of demolition from within. Strong residual radiation on meters, ordered site secured." His accompanying sketch, smuggled into private archives after the war, shows a vault door reinforced with concentric rings, far thicker than anything required for munition storage. Peenemünde had already been stripped of its major assets by the time Whittaker arrived. Soviet units under Marshal Rokossovsky had reached the Baltic coast days earlier, claiming all facilities east of the Oder. Yet the Allies managed to occupy the western complex long enough to document what the Germans had been building there. CIOS Report 201, marked Restricted, lists an unregistered research wing operating under the code Songerät, or Sun Device. No documents explaining the project's purpose have ever been found, but scattered notes recovered from the offices of Dr. Kurt de Boux, one of Werner von Braun's senior engineers, mention field convergence and thermal containment failure. A week after Whittaker's discovery, British sappers managed to breach the tunnel. Inside, they found vitrified concrete walls, melted as if by intense heat, and dozens of sealed crates bearing SS insignia and the markings Ahnenerbe Forschung, Ahnenerbe Research. Every single crate was immediately confiscated by US technical intelligence teams and loaded onto aircraft bound for an unregistered RAF field in Norfolk. The manifests for that flight list: metallic components, experimental vacuum systems, unidentified organic remains. Not a single item ever resurfaced. Soviet intelligence was not far behind. By July 1945, reports from the NKVD's 10th Directorate suggest that Red Army engineers had discovered an extension of the same tunnel network beneath Peenemünde East. The Soviet report, coded file number 386B, describes large spherical chambers lined with conductive tiles and burnt silhouettes on walls resembling human figures. The section chief concluded that high voltage or thermal discharge testing was performed. Here, with unknown apparatus, Moscow ordered the entire area sealed and declared a restricted zone. To this day, part of the original site remains off-limits to the public. The Americans moved faster. Under Operation Paperclip, several scientists formerly attached to Peenemünde were quietly relocated to Fort Bliss and White Sands. Among them was Dr. Theodor Kruger, a physicist whose wartime notes contained multiple references to Der Schwarze Tresor, the Black Vault. During his 1947 debriefing, Kruger told Army intelligence that the project was not a weapon, but a gate. His exact words, as transcribed by interpreter Captain Richard L. Owens, read, "It was about power drawn inward, not outward. The Führer wanted a weapon. We built a wound in space." Owens dismissed the statement as metaphorical until Kruger was found dead 2 weeks later in his quarters, an apparent suicide. The note on his desk contained only a single line in German. They took the sun underground. The documents concerning Songerät were classified above top secret under a new codename, Operation Selene. Every trace of the project disappeared from official record until 1952, when a CIA cable sent from Frankfurt referenced anomalous reactor components possibly originating from Peenemünde's Sondergerät facility. The cable was routed to the Atomic Energy Commission's Division of Restricted Data, but its attachments were removed. When the cable was declassified decades later, the The section describing the recovered material was replaced with a single line, section deleted for national security reasons. Eyewitnesses from the occupation described unusual physical effects near the Black Vault's entrance. One British engineer, Sergeant Alan Price, recounted in a private interview in 1961 that compasses would spin violently when brought near the hatch. It was as if the air itself had a current, he said. Metal objects vibrated slightly. You could feel it in your teeth. His superior officers dismissed his testimony, yet the same phenomenon was independently reported by Soviet engineers on the opposite side of the site later that year. Peenemunde's destruction after the war erased many of its physical traces. In 1948, East German authorities detonated the remaining surface structures to prevent looting, but the underground vaults were never fully mapped. During the 1970s, a team of West German geologists conducting seismic surveys detected a dense, metallic mass roughly 40 meters beneath the modern museum site, directly aligned with the coordinates of Whittaker's original report. Their findings were quietly suppressed. The team was told the anomaly was old reinforced concrete. One of the researchers, Dr. Ernst Lennert, later revealed that their instruments had registered a hollow object the size of a submarine, surrounded by fused material. A second clue surfaced in 1994 when the German Federal Archives released fragments of a wartime logbook from the SS Technical Branch. One entry, dated February 1945, states, Phase 3 trials incomplete. Thermal spike caused collapse in Chamber 2. Personnel losses, 12. Seal vault until further notice. Await Himmler's authorization. No follow-up entry exists. The following page is missing entirely. Historians have long debated what the Songeray might have been. Some claim it was a prototype nuclear reactor, others an early plasma propulsion test. But there are inconsistencies. The technology referenced in the surviving notes, specifically closed-loop photon acceleration and non-reactive field containment, resembles no known wartime research. The US Army's Technical Intelligence Summary No. 74, declassified in part in 1976, includes a curious footnote. Certain recovered materials from Peenemunde exhibit isotopic ratios inconsistent with terrestrial manufacturing. The note was later struck from subsequent editions. The Soviet perspective adds another layer of intrigue. In 1959, a classified report from the Kurchatov Institute described an unidentified energy residue detected on metallic fragments transported from Germany after the war. Laboratory analysis recorded radiation signatures that did not correspond to known decay sequences. The Soviet scientists dubbed the phenomenon blacklight emission due to its ultraviolet component. Those fragments were stored under archival number 16 Chi until at least 1983, when the trail abruptly ends. Today, the Peenemunde Historical Museum acknowledges the site's underground tunnels, but denies any knowledge of the so-called Black Vault. The lower levels remain sealed, with access restricted by the German Federal Property Agency under environmental hazard regulations. Visitors are told the area contains unexploded ordnance. Yet satellite imaging conducted by civilian researchers in 2017 revealed a subsurface anomaly, a perfect circle, 30 meters wide, beneath the former launch stand. 7. Thermal scans show the soil. Temperature above it is consistently 2 degrees, higher than the surrounding ground. Even in winter, what lies beneath remains unknown. If the Songeray truly existed, its purpose was never disclosed, and every scientist associated with it either died under mysterious circumstances or vanished into post-war intelligence programs. The physical evidence, fused concrete, isotopic anomalies, untraceable components, points toward an experiment that exceeded the limits of wartime science. The Black Vault endures as a sealed scar beneath the Baltic dunes, guarded not by soldiers, but by silence. And those who have walked its surface say that, on calm nights, the sand vibrates faintly, as if something below still hums in the dark. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Iron Cathedral. In the dense forests of Lower Silesia, a few kilometers outside the town of Walim, stand the ruins of what locals call Żelazna Katedra, the Iron Cathedral. Officially, it was listed during the war as a steel production site under the Deutsche Schlesische Hüttenwerke Consortium. In reality, it was one of the most secretive SS industrial research complexes ever constructed, built under the direct supervision of the Ahnenerbe, and overseen by SS Sturmbannführer Heinrich Scholz. For years, the ruins were just another relic of Nazi industry until post-war intelligence files began to reveal something deeply unsettling about what had happened there between 1943 and 1945. The Iron Cathedral project began as part of WWII, the network of subterranean facilities dug into the Owl Mountains for the Reich's most advanced weapons programs. But while Fraser's other sites focused on rocketry and uranium enrichment, the Iron Cathedral's blueprints, recovered in fragments from an abandoned depot in Dresden, depict something else entirely. An array of enormous parabolic chambers, reinforced with heavy iron and acoustic baffles, descending hundreds of meters underground. The chambers were arranged like the pipes of an organ, with the central one labeled Resonatorraum, handwritten. Notes along the margins describe Schwingungskontrolle, vibration, control, and Schall concentration, bis 200 Dezibel. The first allied mention of the site appears in a British SOE memo from December 1944 titled Enemy, Research, Silesian Sector. The document references intercepted German communications about a project capable of neutralizing fortifications through sonic resonance. It was marked with the project code Zvuk 9. The memo includes the remark, activity in Walim exceeds industrial purpose. Possible directed energy research under SS supervision. No follow-up report was ever filed. Local accounts paint a more disturbing picture. Villagers in Walim and nearby Zechka spoke of nights when the earth seemed to tremble and the air itself roared. Shepherds found livestock dead in the fields with burst eardrums and shattered bones, though no shelling had occurred. Some claimed that birds avoided the valley entirely. A declassified OSS report from 1946 later described the region as acoustically scarred, where even echoes behaved unpredictably, dispersing and returning delayed by several seconds. Scientists who visited the site after the war noted the same phenomenon, standing near the collapsed chambers. They heard their own footsteps echo multiple times at irregular intervals. The Iron Cathedral was destroyed deliberately. In early 1945, as the Red Army advanced into Silesia, Scholz ordered the main resonator tunnels sealed and the equipment dismantled. According to Soviet field logs from the First Ukrainian Front, explosions were heard from within the mountain days before troops arrived. When engineers entered the tunnels, they found the remains of heavy steel plates fused to the rock walls and melted cables resembling twisted vines. The report also describes a metallic odor and severe disorientation among entry personnel, followed by nausea and dizziness lasting up to 48 hours. Soviet investigators concluded that the explosions had triggered a collapse of high-pressure sonic equipment. Moscow labeled the findings classified, acoustical weaponry, and the site was closed. In 1964, Polish geologists surveying the Owl Mountains rediscovered the ruins during an effort to map post-war mining tunnels. Their survey notes mention massive metal resonators and concrete forms with consistent curvature suggesting frequency modulation design. The instruments recorded electromagnetic fluctuations within the tunnels that defied normal geological explanation. Within a week, all research activity ceased. The archives of the Polish Geological Institute list the reason for closure simply as unexplained interference. In 1990, after the fall of communism, the site was briefly reopened to historians. Among the documents recovered from the Wrocław University archives was a partial translation of an SS engineering report titled Eisen Cathedral Versuch 12a, Iron Cathedral Experiment 12. The report describes tests conducted on 17 December 1944 involving oscillatory generators driven by magnetic induction, the goal to measure resonance impact on fortified concrete and organic tissue. The test allegedly achieved complete liquefaction of control, medium, and fatality of all subjects at range, exceeding 50 meters. The subjects were listed as Freiwillige Stufe 2, volunteers. Level 2. Historians believe this euphemism referred to concentration camp prisoners. The report ends abruptly with the words, sound persists after power down, possible atmospheric retention. Eyewitness statements collected by local researchers decades later mention that after the war, Soviet engineers continued experiments in the lower tunnels for several months. Villagers described strange humming sounds and tremors deep in the mountains, long after the Germans had fled. A local farmer claimed to have seen trucks leaving the site at night, covered with tarpaulins. In the early 1950s, the area was fenced off and marked as a restricted military zone. When it was reopened in the 1990s, several chambers were found flooded, the air inside carrying a low, pulsing tone that microphones could not record, but listeners felt as pressure in their chest. In 2001, a Polish documentary crew exploring the tunnels recorded a continuous low-frequency rumble, measured at 17 Hz, below the threshold of human hearing, but capable of inducing fear and disorientation. Their footage ends abruptly when the camera's power fails. The remaining frames show ripples on stagnant water, forming perfect concentric circles, though no vibration source is visible. Sound engineers later confirmed that the frequency corresponded to the natural resonance of the tunnel's iron walls. Theories about the Iron Cathedral range from crude sonic weapon prototypes to experimental seismic amplifiers. Yet none explain the physiological effects still reported at the site. Visitors describe migraines, vertigo, and auditory distortions even without functioning equipment. In 2013, a research group from the University of Krakow conducted a controlled study and found measurable electromagnetic resonance within the chamber walls, oscillating cyclically every 42 seconds. The origin remains unknown. One unverified testimony from a surviving SS technician, recorded in 1958 by the East German Ministry for State Security, may offer the only first-hand account of the final experiment. The technician claimed that Scholz's last order was to make the mountains sing. On January 15, 1945, power was routed from an underground hydroelectric generator into the resonator array. "It began as a hum," he said. "Then the floor started to move. The sound was everywhere, inside your head, in your teeth. Some men went mad. Others just fell down, bleeding from the nose and ears. The colonel kept shouting, 'Hold the tone!' until the walls cracked." His interview transcript ends there. He died 3 days later, cause of death listed as heart failure. Today, the Iron Cathedral remains sealed under a thick crust of earth and vegetation. Only fragments of rusted machinery and a few warped steel beams hint at what once stood there. Tourists visiting the WWII complex often report hearing faint metallic echoes, as if something was still resonating below. Polish authorities have repeatedly denied permission for deeper excavation, citing safety hazards. Yet in classified correspondence between the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Defense in 2018, one phrase appears repeatedly in the margins: persistent subsonic activity, no geological source. The mountain keeps its own rhythm now. The echoes of the Iron Cathedral continue to hum beneath the soil of Silesia, long after the last generator was dismantled. And whether those tones are merely artifacts of rusting metal, or the aftershock of an experiment that should never have been conducted, no one alive can say for certain. Chapter 5: Cold Dawn. The Forgotten Files of Station Grey. In the far reaches of the Arctic Circle, on the desolate Svalbard archipelago, a lonely cluster of prefabricated huts once housed a top-secret NATO listening post known only as Station Grey. The project was commissioned in 1953 under the guise of meteorological research, but its true function lay in intercepting encrypted transmissions believed to originate from remnants of Nazi communication networks. Messages that, according to declassified fragments, continued long after the Third Reich had fallen. Officially, Station Grey never existed. Unofficially, it was one of the most isolated outposts of the early Cold War, and one that vanished without explanation. The establishment of Station Grey followed a peculiar trail of intelligence. In 1952, British signals analysts at GCHQ detected shortwave transmissions broadcast at irregular intervals from the high Arctic. The signals consisted of automated Morse bursts, numbers, coordinates, and repeating call signs beginning with DLZ. Cross-referencing the call signs with wartime archives revealed a match to the Kriegsmarine's U-boat network, specifically a defunct relay station near Narvik, destroyed in 1945. But these new transmissions were modern, employing updated encryption far beyond anything from the war years. MI6 believed a clandestine exfiltration group, possibly composed of former SS intelligence officers, was attempting to maintain contact with sleeper cells hidden across Europe. In response, NATO authorized the establishment of a joint British-American facility to triangulate the origin of the broadcasts. Construction began in early 1953 near Isfjorden, Svalbard, under the codename Grey. The official cover described the site as the Arctic Atmospheric Research Station. Supply records show the delivery of advanced radio equipment from Fort Monmouth, cryptographic hardware from Bletchley's post-war successor, and a classified frequency analyzer built by RCA. Personnel numbered only 14: linguists, cryptographers, a US Navy communications officer, and 2 Royal Engineers. They were led by Commander Robert Hanley, a veteran signals officer who had previously served in Operation Venona. The first 6 months of operation were routine. Then, in late January 1954, Station Grey intercepted a series of transmissions that changed everything. Unlike the previous bursts, these were coherent text messages in ciphered German, prefaced by the phrase Directive via. When decoded using captured Enigma parameters, the text referenced relocation of assets and continuation under ice. The analysts assumed the phrase was metaphorical until one night, at 02:17 local time, the station recorded an unscheduled signal that seemed to originate from beneath the Greenland ice shelf. Commander Hanley's logbook, preserved in partial scans, describes the moment. Signal strength increasing from below horizon. Bearing fixed. Frequency modulates every 11 seconds, resembling sonar reflection pattern rather than transmission. Suggest non-surface origin. Hanley contacted NATO's Arctic Command requesting confirmation of submarine presence in the region. The reply: no Allied vessels in area. Maintain monitoring. 2 days later, the signal ceased. By mid-February, Station Grey had become a place of growing unease. Radio operators reported headaches, sleep disruption, and auditory hallucinations. A persistent clicking in the ears synchronized with static bursts. The generator's fuel consumption inexplicably doubled. Hanley wrote in his diary, "The instruments hum when silent." On February 22, 1955, contact with Station Grey was lost. A Norwegian patrol vessel, Emseder, reached the site 12 days later. Its captain, Arvid Johansen, filed an incident report now held in the NATO archives at Brussels. The entry reads, "No signs of struggle, buildings intact, supplies untouched, food frozen in plates as if crew departed mid-meal, radio log partially destroyed. Final entry time-stamped 04:20 hours, message fragment reads, cold dawn." No bodies were found. The snow around the camp showed circular melt patterns, each approximately 3 meters in diameter. Instruments retrieved from the communications room continued to emit faint static despite being disconnected from power. Within weeks, the investigation was classified under NATO's Special Security Directive 1104. An internal memorandum, later leaked in 1979, concluded that environmental evacuation due to atmospheric instability was the probable cause of disappearance, a vague phrase used in Cold War documentation to denote unexplainable phenomena. Yet further anomalies persisted. In April 1955, the Royal Norwegian Air Force detected an unregistered beacon signal transmitting the same DLZ call sign from a position directly beneath the Greenland ice shelf, approximately 900 kilometers from Svalbard. The frequency matched the Station Grey intercepts. When an American P-2 Neptune aircraft attempted to localize the source, all onboard instrumentation failed for 9 minutes. The mission was aborted. The mystery deepened over the next 2 decades. Between 1961 and 1967, at least 5 civilian expeditions reported picking up the same frequency while conducting magnetic surveys in the Arctic. Each time, the signal appeared briefly at dawn, broadcasting the numbers 404, followed by a long tone and silence. Analysts at SHAPE headquarters in Paris correlated the signal with minor fluctuations in geomagnetic readings, but no geological explanation was found. One internal note dated 1965 reads, "Pattern corresponds with tidal compression points, possible mechanical source beneath ice mass." In 1979, declassified British Ministry of Defence files revealed that the last official attempt to contact Station Grey's frequency occurred on October 4, 1962, the same day as the first atmospheric nuclear test conducted by the United States above the Arctic Circle. Operators monitoring the blast telemetry recorded a brief transmission on 12.53 MHz. Cold dawn received. Awaiting orders. The signal vanished seconds later. It was dismissed as interference. By 1998, when Norway's Polar Research Institute began digitizing its Cold War archives, one sealed file labeled Svalbard 1955 Incident was discovered in a locked cabinet. The contents included several undeveloped photo negatives and a weather logbook from Station Grey's meteorologist, Lieutenant David Mercer. Among the pages were sketches of auroral arcs shaped unnaturally linear, described as two vertical bands converging at zenith. Mercer's final note, dated February 21st, 1955, reads, "Light on horizon pulsing with radio beat. Not aurora, crew uneasy." Hanley says it's the sea listening back. When the negatives were developed decades later, they showed faint images of what appeared to be circular indentations in the snow around the base, perfectly symmetrical, forming a ring nearly 30 meters wide. Analysts compared them to pressure waves from sound or vibration, though the area contained no heavy machinery. The following year, a retired US Navy technician came forward, claiming he had been part of a classified recovery mission dispatched to Svalbard in March 1955. His testimony, recorded anonymously, described recovering frozen footprints leading away from the station in all directions, as if the crew had scattered blind. He also claimed that one of the recovered tape reels contained a voice transmission buried within static. When slowed down, it allegedly repeated the phrase, "We are beneath," in distorted German. Modern research efforts into the incident remain inconclusive. Attempts to triangulate the reappearing DLZ signal have failed, though as recently as 2011, amateur radio operators in Tromsø reported hearing faint bursts identical to the 1955 recordings. The signal appeared during a period of high geomagnetic activity, transmitting for exactly 3 minutes before disappearing. Spectral analysis revealed frequency drift consistent with a moving source, possibly submarine, possibly glacial. But no trace of man-made equipment has ever been found in that region of the ice shelf. The Norwegian government maintains that Station Grey succumbed to environmental exposure and carbon monoxide poisoning. The site itself, buried under decades of snow, remains off-limits due to unstable permafrost. Yet in 2015, a private expedition using ground-penetrating radar detected a large metallic structure beneath the old coordinates, rectangular, hollow and still emitting low-frequency radio interference. Its estimated depth, 12 meters below the ice. The team's funding was abruptly withdrawn, and all collected data was seized under national security provisions. The legend of Station Grey has become one of the Arctic's enduring ghost stories. Fishermen still speak of nights when static dances over the shortwave band, and the words "cold dawn" emerge faintly through the snowstorm noise. Whether the outpost was destroyed by natural forces, silenced by military secrecy, or simply swallowed by the ice, its final transmission remains one of the most haunting on record, a whisper across frozen airwaves from a place that should no longer exist. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the Greenland ice, the signal still waits for an answer. When the last encrypted signal faded and the archives fell silent, only fragments remained, charred documents, blurred photographs, and whispers from those who were told to forget. The vanished convoy, the ghost army, the Black Vault, the Iron Cathedral, and the frozen station, all connected by a thread of secrecy that outlived the men who guarded it. Each operation sealed behind conflicting reports, each name erased, yet the patterns endure in the margins of declassified pages and the static between frequencies. As modern historians dig deeper, new anomalies surface, coordinates that match, codenames that repeat, signatures that never should have overlapped. Perhaps these were not isolated incidents, but symptoms of a single hidden continuum, stretching from Berlin's ruins to the polar ice. The war may have ended in 1945, but its shadow still flickers across forgotten reels, waiting for someone to decode what remains of the truth buried beneath the world's silence.